What's happening? Welcome to the Wongnotes podcast, episode 2 with John Scofield. I'm super stoked because he's one of my heroes. Speaking of heroes, did you guys check out last week's episode with Satch? I hope you did. That was episode 1. Even Sammy and Michael Anthony checked it out. Van Halen. Speaking of Van Halen, next week on this podcast, I'm going to be wearing a Van Halen t-shirt. Did I fake you out there? Did I make you upset? Sorry. Take that energy, harness that energy, and smash that subscribe button and that 5-star review. Because you know what? We're trying to go up these charts. Get people excited about this podcast. Get more people listening because we are very excited about all the guests that we have this season and for next season. But today's episode, John Scofield. I first got wind of Sco when I was a teenager, when BRR Jam came out. Some of my friends in the jam scene were like, bro, you gotta check Sco. He's sick. Sure enough, they were right. Also, my dad had a bunch of his records and CDs at home that I was able to devour as soon as I really got hip to him. He's one of those cats that you know that it's him as soon as you hear it. You also know when someone's trying to do the Sco thing. We're not just trying, like when they're like doing the Sco thing. It's a thing. To have a Sco thing, something that's yours, is so unique. Not that many guitar players have that. With him, he's got it. And it's so hard to quantify what it is because part of it's the tone, the touch, the feel, the phrasing, the sound of it, timing, note choices. There's so many complex things that go into the Sco thing. It's really fun to try to dissect and see what it is. And to talk to him about it, what a dream. I'm stoked about this. We get into some things. If you're not familiar with Scofield, let me give you a little more background. He's played with everybody from Chet Baker, Miles Davis, Herbie Hancock. He had Jaco Pastorius in his band. Okay? We're talking heavy cats. Scofield is one of the cats. He's one of the few guys to infiltrate both the jazz scene and the jam scene. A lot of jam heads know him from like Phil Lesh and Friends, Government Mule, or BRR Jam. It's fun. We kind of address this in the interview, and he talks about the scenes being very similar and the intention being very similar. So it's fun. Look, whether you know Scofield or not, you're going to get a lot out of this interview, and I'm really excited for you to hear it. Let's hit it! All right, now that I got you all amped up, I just want to take a second and acknowledge something because many of you guys know that I am from Minneapolis. I grew up here. I live here now. And our city is hurting, and many people around the world are hurting because of some things that are happening right now. And I just wanted to acknowledge it and say this interview was done a few weeks ago, so we don't address any of those things now. Okay? All right, a lot of people ask me what I use on the road for backline gear when I show up at a festival, when I show up at a gig in another country or something and I haven't been able to fly with all my gear. Basically, what I ask for is any Fender Stratocaster made in the last 10 years to be there for me to use as a backup. I normally travel with my guitar, but I always ask for a backup Strat, just in case. And I also say pretty much any Fender tube amp is good to go. My preference is a Super Reverb. It's got 4 10-inch speakers, which respond a little bit differently than 12-inch speakers. Otherwise, I'll ask for a Fender Twin Reverb, which has a little more oomph in the low end. But the tighter low end of the 410s sometimes is nice for that spanky funk thing. Also, Fender Deluxe, it's great. Hot Rod Deluxe, those are awesome too. Basically, I've trusted Fender tube amps with any situation, with Wolfpack or Fearless Flyers, or when I'm touring on my own. We just ask for Fender tube amps, and they've always been really great. And, you know, sometimes people are into the vintage thing. That's awesome. I dig vintage instruments. I dig vintage gear. But I have found there is a little more consistency in the newer stuff as far as just like, is it going to work really well? Is there some weird noise? Is there some weird buzz? Look, don't come at me. If you like vintage gear, great. Vintage gear is dope. But I'm going off my own experience. So I would suggest go out, check out some Fender amps, check out some Fender tube amps. I also have this I've been trying to do an A/B test on this Fender Twin Tone Master. When I play clean, I've sent recordings of the Tone Master versus my regular twin. A lot of people can't tell the difference. So check it out for yourself. See what you think. All right. Thanks so much for being a part of this. I really dig what you do. You're a huge influence on a lot of people, especially in my generation. And it's an honor to talk to you. And I appreciate you spending some time doing this.
Well, thanks, Cory. I appreciate it. It's good to be here.
There's a thing about the guitar where everybody's trying to figure out their own voice, figure out their own thing on the instrument. And the superpower that you have seemed to have unlocked for yourself as an artist and as a guitar player is that I know within 3 notes if it's you. Can you speak to, in some sense, of how you've developed your voice and what do you consider? Because I'd be interested to hear what you think are the key factors of what your voice is on the instrument and as an artist.
Wow. Well, first of all, thanks, man. That's a huge compliment. And I mean, I think it's probably simpler than most people would think. I mean, first of all, not to make any of this sound, less important than it is. Everybody has their own voice as a human being, and the problem is we can't get rid of it. Because if I had my way. And to a certain extent still do. There are a lot of people that I love the way they play that I get frustrated because I can't copy them. So, everybody's sound has to do with their limitations as well as their strengths. So we got to remember that. But mainly, I knew that jazz music was a kind of music, and I say that meaning the greater jazz.
Yeah.
Thing, was the kind of music that actually wanted you to have your own voice, So I love that as a jazz fan early on, that, oh man, this guy, he's doing his own thing. And the same kind of music can have all different kinds of players, and it's called jazz music, but there's a Thelonious Monk on piano and there's a Bill Evans on piano and a Bud Powell, and they all are completely different, like some guys do this sort of thing, some guys do that thing, but they're all playing the same music, and it just makes it more interesting that they have these different styles, and it's the same. And when you think about writers and actors and films or anything like that, painters, it's a big world out there, and you can find a niche where your strengths will shine. And the other thing, really, when we're talking just about guitar playing and music and stuff, was I wanted to play jazz all the time. I was trying to learn how to play bebop, and standards and just the straight ahead jazz thing, which I'm still really involved with. But because of my age group, fusion came in and was huge. When I just started to get good enough to get gigs, fusion was the thing, So I played in all these bands where I went back to my rock and roll roots, which were, from actually probably like 6 years before that. And so I always had both things happening. Yeah. And also that was a time when that actually was new, you know, when playing guitar and bending notes and playing bluesy, kind of with a lighter setup was different from what jazz guys did, And so it was all kind of just this hodgepodge thing. And at the time when I was putting my style together, so and that wasn't anything up to me. That was just the fact that I was there,
So sometimes just being in the right room or being in the right decade.
I mean, we all are what we are. We're the sum total of everything we've heard and everything we've absorbed. And at a certain time in your life when you're really into it, when you're young and you have this incredible passion and desire, and you soak things up. That's because, and you realize afterwards, well, that was that certain thing that was happening at that time became part of you, Yeah. And so we're all like that,
Yeah, and what's interesting, you bring up the jazz thing, saying that, the music itself and the audience encourages the individual's voice and encourages the uniqueness of a person. I was thinking about that, and then also that's kind of what the jam scene is as well. And what's interesting to me is that you've been a part of both of those things, and the jam scene, I guess, falls under. I mean, jazz kind of falls in that. Like they're both kind of elusive titles or something.
That's where the jam session was a jazz word,
Yeah.
That was like this thing that the old jazz musicians used to do. And it was kind of a special thing a long time. I talk about 1935 or whatever,
Yeah.
And when they weren't playing gigs, they were just playing stuff they liked to do. Yeah, I was very lucky that the jam scene kind of came along and that I could fit my fusion-y stuff or whatever it was, in with that.
Well, yeah, and it seems like there's not a lot of artists that can fit in with both so seamlessly, and especially being such an important part of both lineage of like the jazz side with Miles and Herbie and DeJohnette, Gary Burton, Chet Baker, all those people on that side that you've played with, but then also all the things that you've done in the jam scene with Medeski, Martin and Wood, Government Mule, and Uber Jam, projects that you've been a part of or projects that you've spearheaded. What is the biggest difference, and what's the most common thread that you see between the jazz scene and the jam scene, and also just like that playing style in general?
My take is that as soon as rock musicians started to kind of stretch out and take long solos, which happened in the late 60s, with Cream and bands like that, as soon as that happened, the jazz connection was made. And at the same time, jazz musicians, because all of a sudden there was all this great rock music. I mean, some of the older jazz musicians I know talk about that when they were already playing jazz and good at it, but they might have been in their 20s and a Sgt. Pepper came out and they said, wow, this is really hip stuff,
Yeah.
So I see it as a continuous line from there, that it's always been happening. And when guitar became the number one instrument of the world in the 60s, and every kid wanted to play guitar. And then it just made sense that this other kind of music would be played on guitar, which was utilize improvisation, and jazz, really jazz. I mean, every time we kind of take a solo or whatever, that's a jazz thing, and even though we think of it as like, I'm going to play an Indian solo, or I'm going to play the blues, or I'm going to play a country type thing. The idea of an improvised solo came from jazz and a long time ago, so when we hear the first country western records, with a solo that's kind of improvised, or blues or whatever, those guys kind of got it from the New Orleans jazz. So it's really one straight line. And the jam scene, I guess, was kind of a reaction maybe to, the sort of sterile pop music of the 90s. And young people wanted this other thing. And they went back to this thing that the Dead had been doing and had been around for a while. And the other thing is, I can't think of anybody who stands alone as having invented music,
Sure.
It's a shared thing. So it comes from way back,
Well, and it seems to me like with all that stuff, one of the things that sometimes kind of separates it is obviously jazz and the jam world, rock music. It is groove-based music, R&B stuff, blues stuff. It's groove-based music. Yeah. But some of the difference is some of it's backbeat music and some of it's not a strong 2 and 4. Like certain types of jazz are not a...
There's no 2 and 4.
That being said, you've played with a lot of rhythm sections. You've played with a lot of different bands. And even you yourself, having from like the Gary Granger, Dennis Chambers thing, playing with Peter Erskine, guys like Adam Deitch and Louis Cato, or Bill Stewart and Steve Swallow. There's so many, all those guys have such a unique thing in their own right, and then you have your thing, which is so unique. When you get together with these different rhythm sections in different bands, or when you're putting different things together, what are you looking for in those musicians, and what are you drawing from or trying to inspire or being inspired by with different rhythm sections you play with?
Whatever it is, it's got to be funky.
Oh, yeah.
Remember that song? And, funky to me kind of swings,
Yeah.
So as a lover of swing music and funk, it all just, if it feels right, there's a certain groove thing that's really intangible that I can't say. But when I'm playing with, Adam Deitch or Billy Martin, Louis Cato, and these great drummers and Dennis, early on, Dennis Chambers and these guys, when we're playing backbeat music, like you said, if you pick the right song and the right groove, it feels like there's enough room to find the rhythmic varieties that exist in jazz music, in there. Yeah. And, I got this really, I started playing fusing music with Billy Cobb, a long time ago. And I was into that, but I was still thinking in the back of my head, I want to be a jazz guy and everything. And then when I got with Miles Davis, who was my idol, jazz idol, everybody's, not just me. But when I got with him, I saw how seriously he took how to make jazz work in quote unquote rock or funk or whatever you call it. That's what he was all about. And we talked about it all the time. He talked about it, talked to us about it. And I really understood after a while, how to find that thing, what felt good. And I think he was talking about what swings, that's a word that probably to him, he didn't even want to use it because it had been so overused. Every generation, you just get sick of whatever's going around all the time. And so people were talking about what swings.
And there's probably a preconceived notion of what swing is to a lot of, depending on what generation you're
varies for different people, but just that same thing that feels good in there, he could find it in funk, and when he listened to James Brown or even reggae, and things like that, he found a way to play his thing, and that felt really good. That made you want to keep playing. When I say playing, I mean solo, to play with a group and have forward motion and make it really feel good. And that's when the music comes alive, and that's I've just been lucky enough to play with good players where it feels right.
Well, and I imagine artistically, there's also a certain freedom when it's Miles who gives you permission to do that and is encouraging that, where it's like, some people might, especially the quote unquote jazz snob who might say like, you're not allowed to do something. It's like, well, Miles told me I could, so you're going to fight him on it?
I guess it's human nature to try and just categorize everything,
Yeah.
And the thing was, Miles was really smart, man. He wanted to be number one. He wanted to be a rock star, and he did it. And a lot of people resented him for that.
What do you consider are some of the biggest lessons that you've learned from working with Miles or Billy Cobham or Herbie Hancock?
Those guys from the jazz background spent, a lifetime trying to figure out how to get to the moment of creativity when being spontaneous, and that something happens. And we all know this. I know you know it. When you're there and you're trying out an idea with a group for the first time and it takes off together, and you get this spontaneous first take thing happening, and then you might feel you feel like you're playing in a way, you're not going through the motions, and that actually is better. When you hear that, a recording of that, it's actually better than when, you know what I mean? Totally. It's not like pop music where you're overdubbing and layering everything. That's a great thing. That's something different. But this thing of playing together and getting to that fresh thing, that's what Miles was obsessed about. And it seems like all the great musicians from jazz that I've met are into that. And then when you talk to Phil Lesh, he's trying to get to something like that too. It's not just jazz, it's creativity. And there's something that happens, to how to get to that.
Yeah.
That's what I've learned from and you know what? We know it instinctually anyway. We know this, but hanging out with the great musicians I've gotten to hang out with, it just really solidifies that for you, that wow, what I kind of felt intuitively is right, because this guy is talking about the same thing.
Yeah. And so much of it to me seems beyond just like, here's what I can do on my instrument. It's more about concept. And what I've noticed with some of those cats, and even what I've been trying to absorb through your music, is so much about concept. And when we're talking about those legends and the jazz scene in general, and then the lineage of that sort of thing, if you think about like the year 1959, where you have Coltrane exploring all harmonic, new concept, a ton of harmony. You have Miles doing static harmony with kind of blue. You have Ornette Coleman doing Shape of Jazz to Come, where it's like blowing harmony somewhat out the window. Dave Brubeck in the same year doing Time Out.
Wow, like all the same year.
Yeah, all in the same year. And then you take like kind of using that as a way to branch out into different things and exploring all of those concepts. The one that I seen you and a lot of other funk musicians latch onto is more of like that, from that Miles branch of modal music, or stuff that's kind of hanging in one tonic center for a while, not a ton of changes. That's super fun to explore. But one thing that I notice sometimes, especially in the jam scene, there's a lot of amazing jam bands. There's a lot of bands that are figuring things out, and me still also figuring things. I mean, we're all learning constantly. But one thing that I see sometimes with the one chord modal, just like playing on E7 for 6 minutes or something, sometimes what ends up happening is it sounds like noodling, or it sounds like just kind of meandering over one thing.
That's because they're not jazz musicians. That's the whole thing of being a jazz musician, is to not noodle, Yeah. And the thing is, sure, there's 8 million, college jazz bands that are noodling up there. And it is you're right. It is a big trap, this noodling thing. And I think that you'll probably agree that it's really important to listen to each other. Mm-hmm. I mean, and of course, really listen, I mean, in other words, you don't listen to yourself, listen to what's going on around you. And then your playing will subconsciously fit what's happening. And then it's no longer noodling. And I have to remind myself every time I play to do this, because you know what? Basically, I just want to get up there and show what I can do on my instrument. You know what I mean? But I know that it's better if I listen to everybody and make it fit in and use space. And it's really, I have to kick myself in the ass. And that's what I do. I just remind myself, or try to, every time. And, the reason that's separating the men from the boys, this noodling thing. Because, you can have a band with vocals and hip arrangements, and then you can noodle in between, and the vocals and the hip arrangements are going to be what saves you, But if you're a jazz group, all you got is the solos, all you have is that. So you got to do it good. You got to say something.
Well, you do a really interesting thing where you make your solos stay engaging and interesting, whether it be 8 bars or whether it be 8 choruses. And some of that, to me, I mean, there's ways that I listened. It's like, okay, what are the objective things that Scofield does that makes it sound interesting? And there's phrasing, there's tone, there's time, there's all those little, just things about your playing. But there's also, you have a way of having something feel melodic and using the quote unquote proper scale, pentatonic blues things. But then there's also some interesting kind of out quote unquote notes that you use, or certain interesting harmonic tools that you use to gauge interest and keep things engaging, keep the story going. What are some, like, to you, can you speak to some specific Scofield moves that you approach for harmonic interest?
People ask me that all the time, like, what do you play that's out, that out stuff? What is that?
Yeah.
And I don't mean to oversimplify anything, but I actually am not sure what it is, because, I mean, basically it's kind of, you move to the next fret. That's basically it, but
not to oversimplify, but just move to the next fret.
Which is not right. But I found the different ways of moving around certain things that I like. And when you think about it, if you're playing in one key where there's like 8 right notes or 7 correct notes or 8, right, or whatever, then that doesn't give you too many wrong notes, left. And so a lot of times it can be seen as a half step away. A major third can be seen as a half step away. You know what I mean? A minor third could be a minor third away, but it could also be oh shit, wait a minute, like a whole step away. Anyway, you see what I mean? I'm totally confused and I can't explain it. But the other thing is,
well, it sounds like you're talking about resolution then, and where you're landing.
Yeah, you can land in or out. You can land both places or all the places. But I guess what I wanted to say was my out stuff and everything comes from being a jazz fan and listening to those guys that you mentioned before that pioneered this way of stretching out on one chord. Because as soon as they said we're going to just play on D minor, then they realized they had to do something a little more than that. And Coltrane's group with McCoy Tyner's harmonic thing, wrote the book on that, and I've studied those guys. But the thing is, you talk about study, you can't go to school that I know of for that. And it's a little different than diatonic harmony. And it's part of the beauty is nobody knows what they're doing. But one thing I found is one thing is you got to keep it moving. And I've heard some older guys say that, you got to just mix it up, keep it moving, mix it up.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that helps me a lot when I think about that.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, that's, again, kind of simplifying it, but as a conceptual thing, at least it keeps your mind going, okay.
If I talk about something too, I get so confused and everything, then I realize I don't have to talk about it. I'm just trying to explain something, but already what I'm talking about. So we're okay, And it gets back to that 10,000 hours in order to be a really good player. You know what I mean? You've heard about that, right?
Malcolm Gladwell, yeah.
Gladwell, right. I really think that the mysteries of music will unveil themselves to you if you put in the 10,000 hours. And then you'll be saying, I don't know what it is, but but you can do it. All of a sudden you can play and you understand music, but it's hard to put it into words. And the other thing is, the reason we don't put it into words, I think, if somebody said this, is that thought is actually too slow for improvising music. It's not thought. It's something else, that just is there right now,
That concept I love. And that's actually also a Malcolm Gladwell concept that he talks about in his book, Blink. He's got a book called Blink, where it's just, it actually relates a lot to music and just using your own instincts. And I think the more that we hone our instincts and the more that we hone in what it is that we do, the more it's just, if we get out of our own way, we can just be our best and play our best thing.
Yeah. And the thing is, we all study the geometry of music, whatever that is, major and minor. And it was a big thing when I learned about the cycle of fifths and stuff. This has really helped me. It's not to put down theoretical stuff, but instinct I rely on, or believe in more and more, I guess.
Yeah. And I have people ask me all the time too about like, oh, should I learn music theory? It's like, well, that's a tough question because I think you really should learn music theory just so you have the language and common, like, hey, go to the minor 4 chord. So if somebody says that to you, you know what they're talking about, just for a means of communication. But as far as like writing or playing, I think you're right. Like I'm starting to learn the same thing, that instinct is so much of the game, and it's such a huge part.
And I guess we can improve what we know. Like when you first play a 4 minor chord, you might not really hear it. But if you play it enough and understand it intellectually, after a while it becomes instinct. That's what I've found for me, because I don't have perfect pitch. I'm no musical genius, I'm a genius, but not a music. No. I'm not. And you don't have to be. You just have to do it.
Well, and yeah, eventually what I think about in music too is how it affects me emotionally. And when I first heard the 4 minor, it triggered a certain emotional response that I realized the same thing happened when I hit a flat 7 dominant chord. And then what I realized through the music theory is like, oh, well, it's just a minor 4 triad over the flat 7. No wonder it hits me similar. You know, it's like there's certain things that eventually they're going to trigger a certain emotional response for each of us differently. And then that can inform what we decide to use in a solo because it's going to score the moment.
Yeah. Going for what you love, you know?
Okay. So speaking of not being able to talk about things, I want to hear you talk a little bit about a couple things that we can kind of hopefully make tangible, because obviously, you know, you're
no, I don't mean to, you know, we should, and especially, I mean, because we're doing it for Premier Guitar, we should, you know, I'll try and talk about stuff that we all do. I don't mean to get too off on the cloud here.
Oh no, I think conceptual is great, and conceptual, by the time you have all the like the facility and the timing and the groove and all that stuff, the conceptual is then where the game is and where the fun happens.
If you don't have a concept, you got a misconception.
I like that. There's the one-liner.
That's a pretty good one. I didn't make that up.
But, okay. All right.
Somebody said, Chet Baker said that, but I'm not sure exactly who said that, but I love that.
Concept. That is so good. I think a really important thing in concept too is just your voice, your sound. For me, that sound, my voice, is the Stratocaster. That's what draws out my unique voice in its purest form. And that doesn't mean that other guitarists can't get it. I mean, it's true. Tone is in the hands. But I want to encourage you guys, for those of you trying to find your voice, check out some different instruments. And where to start? My suggestion, Fender American Ultra Series. Okay? They got a Tele, they got a Strat, they got a Jazzmaster. You can try all kinds of different tones and different feels there. Your bass player, they got the P bass, they got the J bass, nice modern feel, classic sound. They're great. Check them out. All right, let's get back to it. It's clear that you have chops, can play circles around the guitar, blah, 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 all that stuff. Whatever. That thing aside, the thing that stands out to me is your tone, your touch, your phrasing. How do you practice those things? Is there a way to actually practice that stuff, or is it really just listening?
Yeah, I practiced it because I feel like whatever concept I came up with, you know, I started out like all of us, you know, I was a blues fan, you know, and I could play like that pentatonic scale and make it happen. I was like, wow, I'm a blues man, you know, and I went back to my blues records and after I was doing it for a while, I was like, yeah, I got it. Oh, that's that. And I could hear it, you know, and I could get a little bending happening on the guitar and all that. And then I decided I wanted to learn jazz, and the pentatonic shape didn't work. I was like, holy shit, wait a minute, this is really hard, you know? But for some reason, I wanted to do it enough, you know? I think partially it was like, I can't just be a rock and roll guy, you know, because, you know, those guys, all they do is get high and get laid all the time, you know? And, which sounded actually really good to me. But, I wanted to go for something else, right? And so I said, okay, jazz. And then I had to slowly find the things on the guitar that sounded like jazz, because I was a jazz fan and I listened to all these records, right? And that, it's almost like when you put your thing together, it's, you know, what you don't want to sound like more than what you want to sound like.
Sure.
You know, so it's those 10,000 hours of screwing around with the guitar and developing a vocabulary of stuff that feels right.
So
you know?
For you, it was more about listening and transcribing and figuring out, getting the sound on your instrument, rather than like reading a book that tells you which arpeggios and chromatic approach notes are going to make you sound that way.
You know, look, I've read a lot of books and, you know, whatever was out there, and you'll glean a little bit from some stuff, but mainly you have to put in the time with the instrument. And that's also, you know, getting guitar hands, you know, so that you're getting a sound like, You know what I mean? When you
Yes.
meet somebody that's just learning guitar and you say, oh, man, they can hardly get a sound out of the instrument. And then you realize, I've been doing this for a while. I can pick it up and get something happening.
Yeah.
Sound-wise, just with the string. I'm not talking about anything other than fingers and strings.
We talked about different rhythm sections you've played with. How do you approach groove with different rhythm sections? How do you approach practicing a time feel, like the metronome grid time feel, versus developing an inner groove and an inner unique time feel? Because your time feel is part of your sound. That's part of how I know that it's Scofield or somebody doing the Scofield thing.
Well, I had really shitty time when I started out, and it was like I've known people that just naturally have really nice rhythm, and in a way, it's like the people that could, get the basket in when they played basketball. All of a sudden, some people could just do it. They had the visual and physical thing. With rhythm, I didn't have that, so I just worked on it so much because I just didn't want to sound like a stiffo kid from Connecticut. I just wanted, so I just worked on it, and I still. Compared to some of the people I play with, my time, it moves around, it drags. I have to force myself not to just slow down to a snail's pace, and sometimes. And then I've also found out about catching the wave of groove and when it enters your system and then you're in there. And then I don't slow down to a snail's pace,
Yeah.
And I also hopefully don't rush, So it's more of the, long period of time that I've been looking at what this is and how important it is. And the rhythm is essential to the music. And I knew that. And again, that's a jazz thing, that maybe comes first. They asked Sonny Rollins once, what's the most important thing about your music? And he thought about it. And he's so melodic and has all this hip melodic and, harmonic stuff, but he said it's the rhythm, and it really is, I guess. If you had to think of one thing, of course, the notes are connected to the rhythm, so certain chords are funky just on their own,
Yeah.
and they inspire a rhythm. But I just worked on it, man. I just thought about it a lot.
Yeah, I love that. How has your playing changed over the last several decades, and how has your artistic vision in your own projects changed over the last several years? How do you keep creatively inspired?
I don't know how my playing has changed other than hopefully I've just gotten better. Mm-hmm. I'm closer to because I've always been me. Yep. I just feel like I couldn't do it, and I've been lucky enough that I've been recorded and on the scene when I couldn't do it,
That being said, hold on, sorry to interrupt you. Is there certain records that you listen back to that you just can't listen to?
Well, anything I made in the 70s, there might be some stuff that's good in there, but I pretty much don't listen to them. Okay. It was sort of more, in the mid 80s, I feel like which was already, I was in my mid 30s, when I feel like then I could get to what I was trying to get to, or to some music, So I don't go back and listen to the early stuff. And, if I listen to a concert from last night, I would be dissatisfied a lot of times, Maybe if I listen to that same concert a month later, I say, oh, that was okay, cool. I was too worried, It's hard to tell. It's so hard to judge your own stuff,
Yeah.
And, so I don't know how my playing has changed, but I've worked on it. So hopefully I've gotten better. I'm getting to the point in life, man, which you're going to get to later on, where you think, man, am I getting worse? Is that just like happening because, in the same way that it's hard for me to run a marathon, actually I could never run a marathon at all, but, it's physical decline. And, I think I'm okay, but, I wonder about that. But, no, I think I've just gotten better. That's basically it. And your other question was where do I go for inspiration, right? Or how do I stay inspired?
Yeah, like you've had so many different projects throughout the years, so many different types of things, such creative vision through all of those. Where do you draw from in that sort of thing?
I draw from wherever the hell I can, man. And sometimes that means stealing, outright theft of music from other places. And I just, I just always really wanted it. I've always been just driven to be a musician. When I started out, I would have just probably worked in a guitar store, just to be around it. And I wasn't ever thinking that it would be as good as it has been. But I do have to, I've got some techniques, where at some point you have to quit and just walk around the block and let your mind recompose itself. And then you'll come back refreshed, Yeah. It's like when you go to sleep and you wake up the next day and that musical problem is not the same as it was when it was driving you crazy the day before.
So sometimes just taking a step back, stepping away, and then.
Yeah, and this is really important, and this is part of what we all kind of know. It's life, it's nothing, not just music, it's everything. So, the other thing is you put in the time, you will see the results. So you have to be ready to work hard too. And, the other thing about how do you stay fresh is we all develop, I think, a second sense of when something has got that thing, that makes it, wow, I like that. And we're just going for that. That's, and that's, again, trusting your intuition. So I'm just always looking for that thing that's kind of fresh,
So what you're telling me is that when you put out BRR Jam, it wasn't because some manager was telling you it was a great business decision. It was a creative outlet.
It definitely was. But you know what? There are a lot of different things that come together. I mean, all of us want to have a career.
Yes.
And we want, and without an audience, your career is going to be giving guitar lessons, First of all, you want to be able to work with other people, and maybe somebody else will be getting the gigs and you're going to be a sideman in that band. Then, you maybe don't have to worry about having an audience in the same way. You have to worry about playing really well and playing the song really well and fitting into the situation and making everybody else sound good, which is what you have to do all the time anyway, whether it's your band or not. But BRR Jam, when I started to play kind of funk stuff, whenever that was, I realized that there was an audience for that didn't listen to Charlie Parker. And I've been lucky because a lot of the stuff I like in that, groove-based area, other people like too, But you know what? I love it when people love the music. I just love it. And I'm not an island unto myself. Yeah. And, there are musicians that I know that are really great and they can't play because there's no audience at all. I mean, they can't even get the gig at Starbucks playing a duet, for Pass the Hat. Yeah. We are all running businesses. We're trying to get our music out there. And so that enters into it, and I know when it's I've played something I didn't like, some song I didn't like, and then you can't play that, If there's anything you don't like, you cannot play it. Everybody kind of has to like the song, so
worse comes to worse and, it becomes super successful, you're going to have to play it the rest of your life.
Right. So you better like it. And, look, we all get sick of stuff, even if you did like it at one time. But, people say, and I know you know about this, people who don't know anything about music say to you, man, you're so good on the guitar. How come you're not like in the Rolling Stones or something? You could have done that. And you know what? I couldn't have done that. I can only do what I could do, and if I was a rock and roll musician, that's because I would have wanted that more than anything, and it's not like you're so good on the guitar, those guys are really good too in their own way. And we each just have to do what we can do, and what we want to do.
That's encouraging. I like that.
Yeah, and and if what you want to do has no audience, you kind of change because we want to exist. We have the instinct for survival. I mean, a lot of the avant-garde jazz musicians in the '60s, Ornette and those guys, there was a scene for that. There were people that loved that and would buy tickets and buy records and they would write about them and all that. So that's why that happened. There's nothing that's completely on its own. We're part of humanity and all.
Yes. Yeah. And when I listen to album, especially an artist who's been around for so long, and I try to interpret what you're putting out as an album, why are you putting out this record? What are you trying to say through this album? I want to get into the artist mind, the creative mind. When I hear something like BRR Jam, it's its own thing. When I hear something like Hudson, it's like old rock tunes and turning them into jazz with a bunch of jazz guys. Country for Old Men, similar thing, but with country songs. And then like Government Mule, the project with them, it's like rock and blues stuff. Or you have a Ray Charles covers album where you're collaborating with other people. It seems like you're pretty intentional with your concepts and with your projects.
Yeah. Well, part of that is the business. And I found that, if you've been in it for a while, then you can get gigs at the festival or at the club or wherever you want to play. But they always say, wait a minute, what are you doing now? Because you did that last year. Yeah. And it really pisses me off because it's like, what the hell? A good group and really good music and we're going to have some different songs with the same personnel. And I don't know what the concept is. That's what I want to do inside because that's real. But the scene has made me do different projects because when I say this is John Scofield playing BRR Jam or the music of Ray Charles or country music or whatever, then all of a sudden they're like, oh, that's interesting. We'll have that. But it's the same old me, but I'm just playing different, bag or whatever. So in a way, I don't like that. But it's made me do all these projects, and I'm so glad I did because every time I learn about some kind of music that I love, like Country for Old Men, I went back. I always knew some country stuff, right? I liked it. Yeah. But I went back and listened to a bunch of the stuff that I had liked and looked a little further into it. And I learned some shit that I wouldn't have learned on my own. So I like that the world makes me do that.
Well, and then in that case, sometimes it is, it's about the management or business decision or the promoters wanting something different and you adapting and saying, okay, well, I'm still going to do my same thing. It's just something else for the publicists to talk about.
Yeah, and you want to work.
Well, that tells me that you're pretty aware and self-aware of the business side of things. You've had a lot of different sidemen. You've been a sideman. There's a lot of people that are wondering, how do you get a gig now? Like, and how do you keep a gig? How do you get session work? How do you become an artist? What are you looking for in musicians that want to be in your band? And I'm also asking for myself because I want to be your rhythm guitar player. And then
I tell you got some nice rhythm shit happening, so we might want to do that sometime.
All right, I'm in.
But you play lead too good, man. You'd be like, hey. And then
I'm cool just hanging in the pocket listening to you, man.
That's what you say right now. But listen, Avi Bortnick, Avi Bortnick, who was the quote unquote rhythm guitar player in BRR Jam, who can take smoking solos, he didn't mind playing rhythm all night, and he was doing more than that because he was triggering the samples.
Yeah.
But he was so good at rhythm guitar that, and with stuff I couldn't do, because his kind of Nile Rodgers kind of, James Brown. I mean, just, whoa, he's so right on, But anyway, I think, first of all, it's a different music world than when I was coming up in the 70s. But I think that the same things hold true, even though you said I'm into the business, but that has also stopped me. I mean, I've made myself not be into the business aspect enough to stay, to follow these basic sort of foundation of you want to be part of a group that makes music. And when you're part of a group, you have to make the whole group sound good. And you have to think beyond what your own needs are right now. You have to make the song sound good. And all this is, you have to work well with others, man. It's like, it's right kindergarten, talking about this stuff, but it's really true. And I think that's the most important thing for any of us. And it turns out when you're leading a band, you have to do that too. You have to, okay, I'm going to do this for the greater good,
Yeah.
Which I say all the time, and a lot of times I probably don't do it because it is my band. But I think that's really important. And it seems like cream rises. If somebody is really good and is out there playing with other people, people are going to hear about them. But as you put together your own projects, even when the phone is not ringing, you just do it anyway.
Yeah.
And that's what gets it happening. And I'm sure you could talk about that too with what you've done. But I think it's really important to take every opportunity to play with other people when you're a young, starting out musician. Even though you say, oh man, I don't want to do that, or I'm not good enough to do that, or doesn't sound like that much fun, I'd rather stay home and play along with YouTube. Something happens when you meet other people and the networking starts, and that person knows somebody else, and that person knows somebody else, and then you're connecting and you're learning in a way that you wouldn't learn when you sit home left to your own devices.
Totally. I love that.
Thank you.
So that's kind of like if you want to get a gig playing for another artist. But if you had still had all the knowledge that you have now, you have all the wisdom and all the everything you've learned from all the greats that you've played with, everything you've learned from your own experience touring, putting out records, but nobody knows who you are. You're still as good as you are and have all your same instincts. What would you do if nobody knew John Scofield? What would you do to get going and started as an artist today?
If nobody knew who I was and I could play the way I could play, I would be upset, But nobody would get to where I'm at if they hadn't been on the scene. Because I couldn't have developed what I am without all the hours and hours of messing around with other people and putting together music for this gig, this whatever thing, lame stuff that didn't turn into anything, gigs that were awful, and terrible bar mitzvahs and weddings that I played at, whatever stupid jam session with guys that weren't as good as you, blah blah blah, and all that comes together to make you who you are. And just as far as getting your own music out there, I think now is such a, when I started out, there were these tiny little record companies that you could get on if you were sort of good. You know what I mean? And you would and you could make really cheap records. And I made records for Enja Records in Germany, and there was a Japanese label. And I was already kind of on the scene enough to get those things. And I think that those sort of things still exist somewhat. So, if you're a young musician, I would say get your music out there. And I know now with YouTube, everybody's doing stuff for free and just putting it out there. And maybe that's the way to do it. I don't know. And luckily, I haven't had to think about that, except for telling people to turn off their phones when I play a gig so that they don't put it on YouTube. No, a part of it is the information age has made it such a different world that I'm not quite up on exactly how to get your music out there, other than take every opportunity that comes your way. And everything adds up to a career in the end of just doing this and that. And, it'll work out. And it's not going to be easy because being a musician is none of us are in it for the money, are we? I mean, if we'd be doing something else if we were obsessed with financial security.
Absolutely.
To the point, But we love the music and we just want to be part of that, and we just will do anything to be part of that.
Yeah. For many of us, there's just no choice. It's what we were called and meant to do with life, and we just have to do it.
There you go.
We've both had the experience of playing with the Metropole Orchestra, and playing with a 60-piece orchestra is very different than playing with a 5-piece band. And you've been everything from a big band, 5-piece, 3-piece, 20-piece, 60-piece. You've recorded and performed with the Metropole Orchestra, which is a super fun thing. What's your experience? What was your experience like playing with them, and how do you approach playing with such a large ensemble? Where do you let go of things, and where are you very specific about certain things?
Well, first of all, with Metropole Orchestra and the stuff we did, this Mendoza he wrote most of those arrangements and was in charge of the orchestra. I just had to play guitar, and so I had suggestions about how things went, but mainly I had to again blend in with them, and I was always too loud. It seems totally weird to me that a 60-piece orchestra is quieter than my 5-piece band in my basement, but it is. So that was actually a struggle for me, because in recent years I haven't been using as much distortion pedals, and stuff to get a sound. I've been just turning a deluxe reverb up to 5, and it sounds great. Yeah. And then that can be too loud for an orchestra. And then I have to I'm going to play with shitty tone. I'm going to turn it down. But okay, so but I think what you're talking about is the amount of written music, learned music, as versus to the improvisation. Yeah. And, I've never been satisfied to just improvise. I've always liked the song element. I love songs, And so, as long as the arrangement doesn't get in your way. I've also had the experience of some of my own stuff that I really worked on, and then it was like, this thing is so weighty, we can never get past the arrangement, that it never turns into anything other than this arrangement, which might be good, but it sucks all the mental energy out of the music to follow this arrangement so that nothing else can really happen. Also, it dwarfs the improvisation so much that the improvisation can't shine. So, so it's always this back and forth between, how to make it work, and sometimes too, if I'm thinking, oh man, this is going to be great. I'm going to have like this little 4-bar phrase, and that's all we're going to play, but it's going to be all deep and stuff, Yeah. And then it doesn't kind of work. It just turns into this stupid 4-bar phrase that you're sick of. And then, so you're constantly adjusting and making stuff work. And for me, playing with the Metropole Orchestra was so much fun to hear Vince's arrangements and that orchestra play that music, because I never play with strings and orchestral instruments, So the thrill of that actually just inspired me every time I was on tour with them or recording or whatever.
Yeah, it's an experience unlike any other, sitting amongst an orchestra and having that many people around.
Yeah, we as guitarists don't get to do that. The first time I ever did that, I was a Berklee student, and one of the teachers had written this big thing for like jazz big band and the Boston Symphony Orchestra. So we played at Symphony Hall in Boston, and my amp didn't work for the performance. It was like the thing just blew up all of a sudden. And you can't stop a 90-piece orchestra. It doesn't stop. I'm just there, no sound, and and the violins just thought it was hilarious, that this kid can't even get a sound because his stupid amp blew up,
Oh man. Wow. Maybe they're the ones that sabotage. Maybe the conductor's the one that sabotaged you because you were too loud at rehearsal.
I think you're right. It was the violinists were jealous of it.
Yeah, they unplugged your speaker cables. Just a couple more things before we finish up here. We don't always get to play with other guitar players. In your case, throughout your career, you've gotten to play with some incredible guitar players. You've done a record with John Abercrombie, a record with Pat Metheny, Bass Desire's Mark Johnson record with Bill Frisell. What is it like for you to play with other guitar icons like that?
Well, I mean, guitars really work well together. They really do. We know that. As the lead guy, most of the time you don't play with another guitar. But when you think back to actually the instrument and how we started out, no other instrument can you sit down in somebody's bedroom with two guitars and be a whole orchestra. Guitar works really well like that. And getting to do it with musicians and personality, people that play with such incredible personality as Abercrombie and Frisell and Matheny, it was just a joy.
So their personalities are very different. Their playing styles are very different. How did you adjust yourself and your playing to match that energy, or did you just kind of?
Not really. I mean, I think we adjust to whatever situation without thinking about it. I knew those guys and loved their playing, and we just played.
So you've collaborated with a lot. Is there any other artists that you've still yet to collaborate with that you still really want to?
There probably is. I just can't think of who it is. But what's weird is because I have had a lot of times where you finally get to play with your idol for 2 hours, right?
Yeah.
And you don't really get into it like you do with your buddies, And there's nothing like playing with people and feeling comfortable and getting to do it for a while.
Yeah.
The thrill of playing with your idols is incredible as a fan, because you just get to be there. And that's what makes it all great.
Yeah. All right. To kind of close things off, I have a couple kind of quick fire fun questions just for those that have been itching for gear answers, because it's a guitar podcast. So, there's guitar players love gear, don't they?
I love gear.
Yeah. We all do. Yeah. Okay. So any purchase, call it $20 or less. What does any guitar player need? Some sort of thing. What's the essential? $20 or less. Everybody's got to have it.
A pick.
Great. I like that.
You might play with your fingers, and that's cool, but you might try a pick. Everything else costs more than $20, doesn't it?
Well, the most common answer is headstock tuner.
Oh, good idea. That's right. I mean, I'd be lost without a tuner. I've forgotten how to tune up my guitar, and I think all of us sit at home with our headstock tuners now, and we never tune up by ear. And I like.
Yeah. Okay. Purchase a couple $100 or less. What does everybody need?
You should help me on this, but I actually use high-end guitar cables. And I use the, what's it called? Shit, I can't remember the name of Vovox, V-O-V-O-X.
Okay.
From Switzerland. They make a difference. And I think they're not the only company. There are a lot of really high-end cables. And you know what? I've A-B'd them, and they make a slight difference.
Is it in tone? Is it in clarity? Is it in EQ response? What is it?
It's sort of more tone is there. A little bit more of everything. And, I got a good story. When I was playing at this Italian restaurant with Michael Moore, the great bass player, on West 13th Street, I played there all the time, just the two of us, right? Yeah. And Jim Hall lived across the street. And one day I forgot my guitar cord. And this was in the 70s. And I knew Jim a little bit. I had taken a couple of lessons from him. And he knew I was one of his fans and everything. And so I called him. I said, Jim, I've got to play in like 10 minutes. Can I borrow your guitar cord? He goes, okay, just meet me in the lobby of my building. It was right across the street. And he gave me a cord that I went and plugged in. It was this little red cord, right? And there were no highs when I played through this cord. It was a piece of shit. And I realized, that's the secret of Jim's mellow tone.
This is the game.
I don't know. But then afterwards, I thought maybe he just gave me the crappiest chord he had. I don't know.
He's trying to steal your gig. He wants to make sure you don't sound good, so he gets the gig. All right, how about this then? No limit on price. What's the purchase that every guitar player needs? What's the one piece of gear?
What we need is a new guitar. That's what we think we need, but we actually probably don't, because I really think, I mean, to a certain extent, it's in the fingers, and that's way the most important. You have to have a good instrument.
Yeah.
You can't have a broken guitar. You have to have one that's functioning properly,
Yeah.
And there is a difference between a Tele and a Strat and a 335 and an L5. They are different animals,
Yeah.
And so you become aware of that. I can't stop lusting after other guitars, and I think what we need more than anything is to sit down with one instrument. This is kind of the jazz way. Like when you would see Jim Hall and Kenny Burrell and those guys, they would just bring their guitar to the gig.
Yeah.
And then you would see them 15 years later, and it was the same guitar. And I remember Jim Hall told me when I was asking him something about technical about the guitar, he goes, "You know what? I don't know very much about the guitar." And I thought it was stupid for him to say that. And then afterwards I realized, no, he compared to a luthier, I guess he doesn't, because he just plays them.
Yeah.
And it's, so for unlimited price, what do we all need? Well, what's helped me was to get a good amp, and there are different kinds of amps. And I remember when I was a kid, I moved up, and eventually when I was about 17 or something, I bought a Fender Twin, and it was the one that I bought from Manny's Music Store had 2 JBL 12s in it.
Yeah.
So this thing was so clean and loud, and it just sounded awful, man. And I was blowing everybody's ears out, because I don't even think I had a distortion pedal. It's just like, why? I had no idea why this sounded like shit, right? And then I went in this. It was in Connecticut where I grew up. There was this hi-fi store where, for some reason, they had an old Magnatone amp that was kind of broken, But I just wanted to try it out. I plugged in, and it was like, oh man, this is it. There's a little bit of distortion. I was like, well, this is cool, from the amp. But it was loud enough to play with a drummer, and so you need to find an amp that works nice. Now, some other people, if they're going for an archtop, big, fat jazz guitar sound, they might just want a polytone, and that's it, because that's what works well, Yeah. But for me, it's been finding that amp that has some give and some warmth, and that's why I like Fox AC30s, Yeah. But they're a little too loud to play with my buddy Bill Stewart. He gets mad at me. So when I started playing through a deluxe, the new Fender 65 reissue deluxe reverb amp. That works because that has a nice thing.
So the drummer's telling you you're too loud.
dig that. Well, it's just this. My buddy Bill Stewart. He actually wants to hear his drums when he hits them.
How about that?
Yeah.
Oh, Bill's amazing. Incredible touch.
He's I think a genius, actually.
Yeah.
And I don't use that word too often.
Well, you did use it for yourself earlier, I think.
He and I are geniuses. No. Yeah. No, I'm not. Only. No, yeah. Did I say that? That's
You said you're a genius, but not a musical genius.
I'm not a genius. I'm pretty. I've never gotten my IQ. My mother had my IQ results, and she would never tell me. But I think she would have told me if I had been a genius, knowing her.
Well, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you being here, and hope that we get to play together in person sometime.
I'd love to, and it was so great to meet you like this and to hang. And I want to go listen to a bunch of Wolfpack. How do you pronounce it?
Wolfpack.
So Wolf. So it is Deutsch.
Well, it's a fake German word for Wolfpack. Wolfpack.
Yeah, somehow I knew that sort of that it was. So I love it.
There you have it. Wisdom and knowledge from Old Man Sco. And I'm not saying Old Man Sco out of disrespect. I'm saying Old Man Sco because that's his Instagram handle. That's how you can find him on social media websites and whatnots. Check out, he's got music coming out all the time. He's a legend. I don't know how he does it. He's inspiring. He's somebody who inspires me to just keep cranking out music, cranking out different projects, and continue to explore who I am as a person and as a musician. And if you're interested in hearing that, me exploring my voice, I got a new record out that I collaborated with John Batiste on, a record that he and I did together called Meditations, kind of based on some jumping points of musical ideas where we just went for it and got into some different moods and different vibes. In the jazz, pop, experimental, it's not free jazz, it's not jazz, it's not like yoga music, but it's just its own thing. So check it out if you're interested. We'll see you next week when we have Molly Tuttle, bluegrass shredder, songwriter extraordinaire. Really fun conversation. We'll see you then.